As mentioned, I'm going to talk about responsible research and innovation at the interface of AI and engineering biology. And this presentation has been developed with Claire Holland, who's also in my institute and works with SynBioChem, and we both work with the CDT for Biodesign Engineering at Imperial UCL in Manchester, leading the responsible research and innovation elements. I'm going to talk to this presentation, and Claire will be involved in the panel session towards the end of the day. So what I want to talk about is claims and concerns about AI, engineering biology, and this interface, AIEB. Discuss the context, the broader context in terms of thinking about innovation and emerging technologies. Then focus on codes and frameworks to guide responsible research and innovation. And finally, give some thoughts about operationalizing RRI in the context of AI and engineering biology. So I thought I might just begin, since I have done some work on both fields, although not yet fully at the interface of the two fields. There is some difference in field size. The synthetic engineering biology field, if we measure it by publication, it's about 1,400 a year. It's been growing with the US in the lead, followed by the UK and China in terms of authorship locations. Artificial intelligence, and this is a new paper produced a couple of months ago, using a fairly broad definition, including machine learning and other techniques, is way bigger. Right now, publications of about 75,000 a year, but that's increasing almost exponentially with China in the lead in terms of just the sheer number of publications, followed by the US and the UK. So just to kind of give some context about this. I want to talk about the claims, and I think we've heard some of them in the first session today, and really fascinating and inspiring talks. But there are massive expectations when we merge together or fuse together AI with the engineering biology field. These claims come in science. We've heard some of these today. X times speed up, 10 times, 100 times, whether it's in terms of the research process, the drug discovery, we can discover what humans can't. And maybe it will inspire the next wave of AI. Although when you look at the difference in size of fields, you may want to put that one in perspective. There's also the claim that AI embodied with synthetic biology will really have major economic impacts. And of course, that it will address the many sustainable development goals and other issues that we're facing, enhance human health and well-being, and improve resilience, which I think, as we realize right now, is a particularly important element in terms of having resilient supply chains and not being over-dependent on petrochemical. Here are a few things grabbed from publications which talk about this. AI spots cell structures that humans can't. That was a piece about drug discovery and the use of AI. The importance of AI and synthetic biology in terms of competitiveness. I think the one from Berkeley Labs, algorithms can bioengineer cells for you. I'm thinking the headline was not written by the scientists, but this is a release by Berkeley Labs. And in this really interesting piece by Dixon, they kind of have an incredible graphic where they talk about resilient society, healthy people, secure planet, all the kind of incredible things that can be done from this convergence. Okay, here are the claims, keep them in mind. Well, concerns. I think you realize I was going to come on to that. So what kind of AI-enabled biofutures are implicated, with what kinds of implications? So using the same trilogy, I think we can see implications for science. So there are concerns have been raised about the process of science, bias, unreliable outcomes. Can we really explain? What about unanticipated consequences? There are also issues, not so far raised, but I'll raise them, about ways of working, about who gets to be involved in this and what it means for equity and diversity within that scientific workforce. There are issues about whether this actually will scale up. And I think, as Jim from MIT mentioned, it's taken a while for SynBio to get traction, and it's still not making the transformation that perhaps was expected 10 or 15 years ago. Is AI enabling in the engineering biology domain going to do the trick? Well, I think we're still going to have many scale-up and commercialization challenges. And we will also have, I think, new additional intellectual property challenges. I think in this domain, perhaps it's the control of the data and the algorithms, not just patenting, that becomes important. So who controls data, who has access to data, will be a really powerful denominator, I think, both in research and in commercialization. And there are issues about data security, hacking, and standards. And in terms of society, sustainability, and security, lots of issues about who may or may not benefit, concerns which kind of combine ethics and the unanticipated about what happens if we have the algorithmic design of living organisms. So there's some living organisms or changes in them we just shouldn't mess with. We have these concerns about nefarious uses and public acceptability of these approaches. And again, some examples drawn from the internet. I'm not quite sure if you can quite see the top of the screen because I have the Zoom window covering it, but basically maybe it's the little subline. Scientists were horrified when an experiment produced thousands of new chemical killers in a few hours. So just remember, the flip side of this scale up in speed for drug design for good purposes is a scale up in speed for biohacking for nefarious purposes. So we need to become, I think we've been sensitive to that. We need to become even more sensitive to that. Many issues about risk in this. There's also some work, and we've contributed to this, about how this combination of AI, automation, and engineering biology does not get rid of mundane work. It doesn't release scientists in the lab for creativity, but actually creates new kinds of mundane work. And we need to think a lot more about, when we implement these techniques, how can we really do them to get the creativity that we're looking for in our lab workforce and more broadly. So you can skim through. I won't go through all of these examples, but the point is that there are many concerns. So having put claims and concerns together, let me talk about hype versus reality. So I think it's quite clear in broader understanding of emerging technologies that at the early stage, they get hyped up. And they get hyped up in order to attract attention, to attract venture capital, to get traction. And in a model that's known as the Gartner hype cycle, technologies will kind of go up in terms of their level of hype. And then, many of them kind of go into a trough of disillusionment. And many actually never exit from that. A few do kind of go up into the second plateau of productivity. Synthetic biology has probably gone through the first hype cycle and is a bit on the downward trough, and maybe now is beginning to kind of come up. But I think we need to kind of keep both the claims and the concerns in the context of these kinds of models, because it's clear that in the SynBio field, despite a decade or more of claims for transformation, they haven't yet been realized. And these issues about genetic modification, public acceptance, and sustainability are with us. With AI-enabled engineering biology, I think it's likely that the claims will be overestimated and the costs underestimated. I also think it's quite likely that the concerns will be overemphasized and perhaps the benefits underemphasized in some parties. Except the thing to keep in mind that AI to date already has a track record of adverse implications from an ethical perspective, whether it's privacy, face recognition, bias, controlled by a few big tech companies. These are already on the table, and I think they kind of color the ways in which AI-enabled engineering biology will be seen and received. So let me talk more broadly about this in the context of the dilemmas of the social control of technology. And I highlight two dilemmas. The first is Collingridge's dilemma of the social control of technology. And the point is, when change is easy, we don't foresee exactly what changes are needed. So at the early stages of development, when we have flexibility, we don't have the full knowledge of the potential adverse implications. And when we commercialize, it's too late. We kind of become locked in. So this is a dilemma. A second dilemma is about societal alignment, which is even if we can begin to develop knowledge, are we sure that this technology meets societal needs? What are the risks? What are the ethics? What are the governance questions that kind of come with this? And these dilemmas of societal alignment have become increasingly important in recent years. So in that context, a number of codes have been developed. So there are codes now in terms of governance, both for engineering biology and for AI. The OECD has produced codes. The Turing Institute in the UK has produced an AI code of ethics, which has been adopted largely by the UK government. And similarly, in engineering biology, we have a number of codes. So I highlight one by the Engineering Biology Research Consortium in the US. If we look at these codes, they all seem to share concern about making sure that the science and the technology promotes broader well-being, avoids harm, fosters justice and equity, and is robust and accountable. So I'm wondering, and I think this is an open question, does that capture all the concerns that we should have, or does this interface of AI and engineering biology generate new concerns? Well, maybe it does. So maybe there's something about the pace of change that when things speed up, speed can have advantages, but speed also can generate new problems. And generally, this is a pacing problem. Technology grows exponentially, but our governance and institutional systems tend to be linear, and that can generate new conflicts. We have issues in terms of the application of AI itself, in terms of the potential for bias in data sets, problems in algorithms, misapplications of algorithms and models. I think all scientists should be aware of that, but yet certainly in AI, they continue to occur. We worry about a stress on quantity, the accumulation of large data sets over understanding, and of course, unanticipated consequences. Do we really understand or know what some of these rapidly introduced modifications might lead to? So these are codes, but I also want to talk about frameworks. So how can we begin to think about incorporating these codes, these principles in the way in which we do research? Well, one of the frameworks is responsible research and innovation, often known as RRI. And the aim of RRI aims to have transparent iterative processes in the development of science and technology, make sure that issues of sustainability and social desirability and addressing social needs are incorporated from the beginning, addressing ethical issues and being open and transparent. The UK Research Council, through the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, has developed a framework for responsible innovation, which I think is a very useful framework. There are other frameworks which are similar, but I'll focus on this one. And basically, it requests and requires that researchers in the domain, anticipate what they're doing, even if they're very far upstream in the research process. They should begin to anticipate what the potential impacts downstream of their research work might be, from economic, societal, environmental, and ethical implications. They should reflect on this and try and work out what's known and what's unknown. It's very important to engage, to not just tell people this is good, but to explain, to interact, to listen, to engage with potential users, with publics, with other stakeholders, and feed that insight and learning back into the process of undertaking research. So this is a framework for responsible research and innovation. When we think about implementing this kind of a framework, it cannot be a tick box exercise. It really has to be iterative, something that we think about. We need to start at the beginning and not at the end of the R&D pipeline. It should be both embedded in our research processes and also undertaken in parallel. And it's intrinsically interdisciplinary, multi-actor. And I also maybe give a plug for a responsible innovation guide developed by the BSI, British Standards Institution, which gives guidelines for the commercialization of emerging technologies, including synthetic biology, that companies can build upon. But the point is to be multi-level, multi-actor in this process. Here are some examples. I'll just run through them quickly. And this is work that we have done with SynBioChem. This first project is an end-to-end menthol study where our research colleagues were developing a way of manipulating E. coli in yeast to make a biological menthol. Menthol is mostly today made currently from mint plants, and there's some chemical production. It's one of the world's largest chemicals by volume, though not by value. And I think the scientists initially thought, who could be concerned or upset about menthol? Well, we explored that proposition. We did a number of engagement activities with publics, with stakeholders, with companies, with policymakers. And we found that certain uses of menthol, people are very attached to, because menthol is something found in food and found in
Vicks, Vapor Rub,
toothpaste and other things. And when it enters into those products, people think a lot about it. We also found that there wasn't a natural rejection of a biological process. In fact, most people didn't know how menthol was produced. But when that was explained and discussed with them, they became more concerned about chemical ways of producing menthol than biological ways of producing menthol. So it shouldn't be assumed that people are against it, but it does need to be there does need to be engagement undertaken. And I think these insights fed back to the researchers and made them recognize that there's a kind of a lot more to commercializing this than perhaps they had initially thought. This is the second approach, which is something we call the Early Rapid Sustainability Assessment Tool, which we've developed the Future Biomanufacturing Research Hub in Manchester. And the aim here is to develop a quick tool. There are many tools which are complicated end-to-end. We want something that was rather quick and through a number of probes could give an early indication to researchers about things that seem to be okay, things that might have amber lights, things that had red lights on that they should begin to think more carefully about. I actually think that this kind of tool, which was customized to sustainability issues in biomanufacturing, could be adapted to think about some of the data bias and other kinds of questions that might occur in AI-embedded engineering biology. And the third example, which is to be mentioned, is the work that we're doing with the Bioengineering Doctoral Training Center with Imperial Manchester and UCL, and developing not an online course or a kind of a checkbox approach to working with these early career researchers, but attempting to engage with them over their 4-year career to embed foundations of responsibility, to get them to think about that, to build that into their project, to engage with societal actors, to talk about their different projects and feed that into the way in which they scale up and think about commercializing. So embedding these processes into educational training is important. Let me also maybe talk about this. I think it's very important for the community, if I think of both the people in engineering biology in general and those engaged, particularly in frontier use of AI, to think through scenarios and engage in public discussion. And maybe there are kind of two sides to this. One is the kind of work which I've been involved with, that's been led by the Center for Existential Risk in Cambridge, about thinking about issues that may be emerging in biological engineering. So there are many colleagues, I think some on this call, that have been involved in this particular effort. And this attempts to identify some of the broader concerns and opportunities that might arise and what we might begin to do about it. But there's also another side to this. This is more on the right-hand side of this slide, where we think positively about how bioeconomy and engineering biology could be used to rebuild more sustainable and resilient societies. And so we shouldn't just assume, because we're working on something that's called biological, or it's bio or engineering bio or synthetic bio, that it's going to automatically have these other desirable societal properties. So this is thinking of a more mission-driven approach and how we can customize and target engineering biology enabled by AI to address the things that society really needs. So let me kind of conclude with some thoughts about constructing our responsible innovation for AI and engineering biology. I think it requires us to be aware of these frameworks, to reflect on them, and to build these processes into the way in which we undertake research. I don't think this is just on any one individual group of scientists. I think that the community has to develop interactions with colleagues in other areas of social sciences and humanities, as well as other areas of engineering and science, to think about these considerations, to think about the human-centered implementation of AI and automation in engineering biology, particularly in the lab, and think about some of the equity and diversity issues that may be involved in that. And as a consortium, to engage with publics, with society, around some of these larger issues, as well as some of the details around standards, governance, regulation, direction, and iterate this back into the design and build processes. And maybe I just conclude with this thought by Keynes, because we're all excited by these new ideas about embedding AI into engineering biology, and synthetic biology as a new idea in and of itself. But in a way, that's not the challenge. The challenge is the old idea. You know, how do we escape from the old ideas of what researchers do in isolated ways in their labs? How do we escape from, in a way, just kind of introducing technologies into society, but without really thinking through their implications? So I think if we can escape those old ideas and blend them with the new ideas, that there really is a very fascinating and exciting prospect for us.